like the story about Meek Mills. He was talking to a room primarily full of wealthy, well-to-do white men. And he was telling his story, and they were kind of shocked by it, like, because now they know him. They're like, how many of you know somebody who has either been shot or, and they're like, no, I don't know anybody.
This is Rhodium Radio, a place where we explore ideas and challenge your worldview. For more episodes, go to rhodiumradio.com.
America is a theocracy. God is money.
Most information these days is being weaponized.
I think Chris used to deny climate change. He acknowledges it, but he's not sure it's man-made. Is that accurate?
We like to act like science is this perfect thing, but science has been wrong a lot.
The wealth gap is not sustainable. You're going to end up with a revolution on your hands.
Depending on who you ask these days, there's a growing concern that the legal justice system in America is in trouble. And do people still believe they can be treated fairly by the court system? In a world where you and I can sue each other on demand, is this like the new battlefield? I think you're going to enjoy the discussion today. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor for today's show, Sway Hammocks. You know, there's this condition out there that not a lot of people know about, but we might have experienced. It's called CBD, Cold Butt Syndrome. And Sway Hammocks has the cure for this terrible disease. If you're tired of the rat race, scrolling through other people's Instagrams, seeing them live their best life, then it's time you get one of the Sway Hammocks, which is like a sleeping bag, pad, and a tent all in one, all weighs less than 3.5 pounds. Get out there and enjoy some beautiful nature. So get your Sway Hammock today at swayhammocks.com. Use code Rhodium for 20% off your hammock. Then you go selfie it up and show people how you're living your best life.
The year is 2011. Mark Chiavarella walks into a Pennsylvania courtroom for perhaps the last time. Just a year ago, at the age of 60, Mark had looked ahead to one day retiring and live the good life. Mark has walked into courtrooms his entire life. Only this time, he's not walking in as Judge Mark Chiavarella, but as Defendant Chiavarella. Today, he won't be the one sending a defendant off to jail, but instead, he will be the one being sent. On this day, former Luzerne County Judge Mark Chiavarella will be convicted of taking $1 million in bribes over the last number of years. For what, you ask? Well, developers of juvenile detention centers had paid Chiavarella to make sure he sent many young juveniles to their new detention centers in need of occupants. When the state is the one reimbursing privately funded prisons, there is an incentive to fill them up. This case came to be known as Kids for Cash. Once the case came to a close, Chiavarella was sentenced to 28 years in jail with charges of racketeering. Reports came from the courthouse in Scranton saying there were overflow crowds. More than a dozen people stood outside awaiting sentencing. They all shared how they had been affected by the judge's decisions. Jeff Pollins was in that crowd. His stepson was convicted by Chiavarella. He said, "These kids are still affected by it. It's like post-traumatic stress disorder. Our life is ruined. It's never going to be the same. I'd like to see that happen to him," he said. Since that date in 2011, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has tossed about 4,000 convictions issued by Chiavarella between 2003 and 2008, saying he had violated the constitutional rights of the juveniles, including the right to legal counsel and the right to intelligently enter a plea.
All right. So, Tim, you want to jump in to respond?
Yeah, the crazy thing is that when people hear stories like this, they're so appalled and offended, and they think that it is an anomaly. Like, this crazy, outlandish judge was doing this heinous thing. But the reality is, it's actually more par for the course. But it's hard to prove that, because how do you prove something? The system is bent to keep it a secret. Just like in the same way, and yes, I know I tend to make everything racial, but it's life. In the same way that at every turn, when you look back in history, Black people have always said, we are suffering this injustice. And the larger society said, well, I think you're being a bit extreme. And then as time progressed and we had the ability to look back or actually look into that thing, it's like, oh, yeah, like redlining, Black people were saying, man, we can't get housing. People were like, nah, you're just whining. Then it was like, oh no, look like history. Redlining was a thing and it had major consequences, it had major effects. You know, you can go on a list of things. So the criminal justice system has always been bent to injustice and to profit those who have money and take advantage of those who don't. That is the American way. You know, one of my favorite sayings is, America is a theocracy and their God is money. And Mark proves that.
But isn't this really a story of the justice system working? He was doing wrong. We caught him. We prosecuted him. And he was convicted.
No, but that's my point. Is people say, well, yes, it worked. In this one instance, it actually worked. But how many Mark Chiavarellas are there out there? There's a whole ton of them. But people would look at you and say, no, there's just like to say the same thing with cops. Well, there's a few bad apples. No, the system is bad. The system is bad. And so, yes, I'm not saying every judge is bad, but it's more than a few. I'm not saying every cop is bad, but it's more than a few.
So do you think this is a concern in the United States? Like with this case, it came out a few years ago, and it was this big, shock and awe. Is this par for the course around the world? Or is this, maybe it's unique to the Western world where there's more money to be thrown around?
We're talking about money affecting, in this
Court
case, somebody
cases.
who's supposed to be above money.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's around the world. It's every walk of life. That's the problem is you take Mark Chiavarelli and put him as a subcontractor bidding on state work, and we wouldn't be shocked by this at all. Bribery scandals happen every day when people are getting a little kickback for throwing somebody some work. This is that same exact thing. It's just in the judicial system. I don't know why we expect humans to be different when we put them in roles like this. So that's where I say look, we're not going to solve the bad people, but you do have to work hard to solve the bad system. So in this case, I know we're talking about judicial system, but privatization of something that shouldn't have been privatized was the problem. The judge should have never had the power to be getting kickbacks. There'd be no reason to send kids to jail if it's publicly funded. Then you can't be bribed.
I was just going to say, so to answer your question, is it just America or is it around the world? No, the problem became exasperated in America because of the privatization of prisons, jails, whatever you want to call it.
Are we unique in that?
We're bigger than anybody else. America jails more people than any other country in the world by far and away. And it has grown, I think jail population or prison population or people in the system, as you want to call it, has, I think, increased by something like, it's somewhere between 200 and 500%. It was some crazy number. I think it was like 500% in the last, 30 years, something like that. So, and privatization was a large part of that.
And privatization, in full disclosure, 15 years ago, I was a huge proponent. If you look at, somebody who's in business, you look at kind of the rationale behind it 15 years ago, I thought, yeah, why wouldn't we privatize the prisons? Private business tends to have less fraud and abuse than public business because it's held accountable by turning a profit, whereas a government entity, typically if they have a $8 million budget and they go over that budget, it would just get increased the next year. If you're running a private business and you bring in $7 million and you spend $8 million, you better figure that out real quick or you'll be out of business. However, what I didn't understand was that unfortunately, and you take private prisons as an example, the commodity is not gasoline. The commodity is not lumber. The commodity is human beings. That is how they make money. So it's today looking back, I feel like an idiot. I'm sure you guys were smart enough to see it coming, but it's like, well, of course this would happen. Because once you enter money into the equation, greed comes into play. And that's where I go back and say, sure, public prisons had lots of problems.
Absolutely.
And I always say we need to be honest about those problems so that we made sure to find a better solution than private prisons.
But there's no incentive if I've invested millions of dollars in a private prison for it to go empty. Meaning there are incentives to make for criminals and to lock those criminals up. That's a bad incentivization process.
Well,
I want criminals in the world to make my business.
No, that's the thing. Like every business in capitalism, what is the goal of your business? To become more profitable each and every year, or to make your shareholders more money each year. So even if this year we made, 50% profit or whatever it is, next year we need to make 51, and the year after that, 52. And if as a CEO you don't, you are failing. So when you have a private prison, like you said, the commodity is human beings, is criminals. So you have to create new criminals. If you don't create new criminals, you're failing as a CEO. That's a bad business model. Our business model as a country should be, how do we make less criminals, not more criminals? So like I said, it was flawed from inception. It couldn't work.
Well, and I think if you look back, prior to privatization of prisons, another kind of thing happened, which was filling our jails with less and less serious offenders. So if you go back to like the 80s when we had a war on drugs, that's when the prisons filled up. And they were still public at that point. So I believe full well what happened was people started looking around and going, oh, wait, is the goal to rehabilitate? Mm-hmm. And we shifted, I believe, at some point in the history when I wasn't paying attention, from really believing like, hey, we need these people to go to prison, pay their debt to society, get rehabilitated, and then re-enter society. And it shifted to like, we just don't want these people in society. Let's put them in prison. And I think like all good businessmen, there were some guys out there paying attention who said, wait, if those people are going to be in prison for 15, 20, 25, 30 years, that looks like amazing reoccurring income. They probably went and lobbied Congress, helped push that into privatization, which my point is that the privatization didn't cause us to get away from rehabilitation. We went away from rehabilitation. People saw it as an opportunity to profit, went and lobbied the government to get allowed to do that, and then probably, created huge monopolies. And then, like Tim said, today in America, very few businesses are ever satisfied because we've gone away from small family businesses where it's like, a dad making $100 and some $1,000 a year, satisfied, having a good family company, paying good wages. Today, having public companies, which most of the prison companies are, it takes you into an incentive. Just like you said, every year you got to do a little bit more and a little bit more, which means also you can't be losing people, which means also you don't want to rehabilitate people. And then I'm like, well, what's the point of that? That sounds like a horrible country to live in, where if you make a mistake as an 18-year-old, there is no incentive for the country to get you back rehabilitated.
And this is one of the differences between Chris and I. We actually agree on a lot of things on the back end of it, but it's at the inception of it where we disagree. So like Chris would say, it kind of just happened that way. Like the country shifted to not wanting to rehabilitate. And I would say, kind of people say, well, the system is broken. And I say, no, the system is working the exact way it was created and intended to work. So when you look back in history and you see that, again, after slavery ended, they said that if you couldn't make someone work for free. However, if that person committed a crime, was jailed, you could then get manual labor out of them for free. So it became a means of control to control this population, which, especially in the South in particular, that they had control over and now they lost control over. They said, well, how do we regain that control? Well, through criminalizing them. That's why they came up with these laws, like these loitering laws, right? So it's like, well, what is loitering?
Right.
It could be the most simple thing. Like you can be standing outside a store just enjoying the day. Now you're loitering. I can come and arrest you. And how do you combat that? How do you fight that? The police says it. The judge okays it. So you have no cause in it. So I wouldn't say that it just like happenstance that we transitioned from rehabilitation to not. I would say it was a concerted effort to control the black population.
And the terrible thing is when you have evidence like this case that you read come out, it's just this, oh my goodness, that there could be private money paying the public legal system to bring incarcerations up. It's an awful thing. Let me give you a story. I heard of a gentleman who opened a private prison in California, and he had a totally different motive, I would say, and I think that'll be exemplified by how he did it. His goal was rehabilitate these guys so that they don't come back. Now, that's a very foreign model. In healthcare, some people argue, well, you can't make the whole world healthy, we'd all go bankrupt. Well, that's not even a reality, so it's not a concern. If you had that reputation, everybody would come to you. So he brings these guys in, he starts to educate them, he changes up their diet, cleans them up, he finds that the aggression and anger goes way down, and they get rehabbed into, and they're not coming back. Now, unfortunately, got shut down for whatever reasons we won't discuss. But yeah, I mean, it shows the point, though. If you do the right things, you can actually rehabilitate these guys rather than no rehabilitation and keep them coming back. I mean, it's definitely sinister to think about. But this case, I think, proves that's the model.
Well, that's where if you have good people in charge that have good motives, like Tim says, it's maybe this is what they want. Like it's the same thing in Cook County Jail. The sheriff runs it there. It's a obviously public, jail. But if you go look at what he does, his whole thing is get him rehabilitated. So he has a person dedicated, and it's a county jail, so it's different type offenders. They're not going to be there long term. But his whole thing is, why would I keep people here 30, 60, 90 days when it might be $250 to get them out of jail, but they don't really even understand how to navigate the judicial system. So he has a person that goes around, I think it's every Monday or every Wednesday, literally just trying to help prisoners get out of jail so that they can just kind of get back to their life and get ready to fight the case they're doing. I mean, obviously we're talking about, in this case, these were, prisons, but I mean, jails are almost just as bad. You have people there for small offenses that are there, like I said, months because they can't afford to get out. And they're not, that isn't their punishment. That's just because they don't have a few $100s to get out of jail so that they can go get ready for their court date.
Now, it's interesting. It doesn't really say it, but it seems like he was preying on the ignorance of a particular community.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely.
What community is that?
A tan community. Right? I mean, that's the point here. If there was more education on how the legal system works, he was preying on, you don't have the right to counsel. And, obviously
you have access to the finances to do it. And like I say, it goes back to like the case of, I can't think of his name now, the young man in New York who was arrested for supposedly stealing a backpack or something like that. And that's the thing. We say you're innocent until proven guilty. However, if you're charged before you go to court, if you can't pay your bail or your bond or whatever it is, you sit in jail until your court case. So this young gentleman, he sat in jail in Rikers, I want to say for, was it up to close to 2 years. And he'd gotten so many fights, altercations. He got in solitary confinement. By the time that he got out, his life has been altered. He missed his graduation. He missed his prom. His life had been changed so drastically. He ended up committing suicide. And mind you, the charges were dropped. So he was in jail for 2 years, had been proven guilty. So what recourse do you have? So forget even the fact of people who have been found guilty of a crime. We're talking about people who you haven't even gone to trial yet.
Okay, so that leads me to ask a question. Where do you see this legal system, this environment going?
Unfortunately,
so we see judges are being bribed. We see jurors have been bribed or under threat of death. All these corruption, the mob, all these things in the history of America. Where do you see this leading in the next few years?
Well, that's the thing. A lot of times in America, we like to look at certain things and say, we're making progress. Like, well, we're working towards progress. But even in the incremental changes that take place, very rarely is progress really taking place. Like the numbers don't change. So the incarceration rate is, even though crime has been dropping in America since I want to say the 70s or 80s, maybe the 80s or 90s, I don't remember when it is. But crime has been dropping recently in the last 20 years. But the incarceration rates are increasing. How do you make sense of that? And so you have programs like in Newark where they are trying to, like if you get a public defender, I mean, it's not going to end well for you. And so they're trying to change the system to where you get a team of lawyers to work on your case, but it's actually still cheaper than the way the system currently works. And so if we adopt more programs like that, it'd be great. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case around America. We tend to keep status quo or go in the opposite direction. So I'm like, Chris is usually very optimistic about the future. I'm very pessimistic based upon the past.
The United States has the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. How much of the world's population do you think we have incarcerated?
Of the whole world's population?
Of the whole world's prison population.
I think it's 40%.
It's 22%, which I would never guess that high. But basically in America, we have an incarceration rate of 716 people per 100,000 citizens. And it cost, I just read, $74 billion in 2017.
And see,
the government is paying?
$74 billion, yeah.
Well,
that's
we're paying.
The cost of
Taxpayers.
us.
Sure.
And I just go back and say it's
not fiscally responsible.
That's irresponsible.
Yeah.
Number one, those people have any potential to get into the workforce. Forget about the money we're spending. I mean, there's $74 billion there, but some of those people will be in the workforce. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates today that we've ever had. But that's because
we calculate
how they calculate it. There's just a lot of people who gave up.
Right.
Just aren't participating. So they don't count those people. So yeah, I mean it's
now a question
what
on that.
state do you think has the highest incarceration rate?
Georgia, no question about it. I know that.
Not true.
California.
Not true. Louisiana. Now I bet if you go look, we're gonna learn there's a connection between the private prisons.
I would believe that.
Out
Okay.
in rural areas.
But I'm just saying, I bet you Louisiana leads the country in private prisons.
They said Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate, or number of people.
I might not be reading this map right. It's confusing. Hold on. Let me reread and then I'll.
Hold on. I got a question on that though.
Wait, I'm sorry. Jared, do you have a donkey?
2 donkeys.
That's not what I heard.
If you heard that a few minutes ago.
No, I was so confused. I'm like, and then I look out. I'm like, is that a donkey?
Yeah. If you hear a turkey, we got one of them there too. No, but hey, what do you think about prisoners' rights? There's been discussion recently about giving prisoners the right to vote.
Yeah.
And I'm on the side of they're still human.
They're still humans.
They're still in this country.
And we're hoping to bring them back into society someday. See, that's the thing. We treat them like animals.
Yeah.
And someone made this very great point. It's like, if you own a dog and your dog chewed up your shoes or peed on your couch, right? You punish your dog, right? You may say, you're a bad dog, and you put it in this cage for a day.
Right.
If you caged a dog for 2 years, Jared, you would go to prison.
You're right.
However, we cage human beings and we're claiming we're rehabilitating them. What do you think that dog will be like when the dog gets out of that kennel for 2 years? It's not going to be friendly, I'll tell you that much.
Be upset.
It'll be upset.
Yep.
And so what would make you think that a human being being caged in a 10 by 10 or 8 by 8 or 12 by 12, whatever size it is, room, especially when you're in solitary for 23 hours out of the day,
right,
interacting with no one other than your own thoughts, and you're going to come out and be a productive part of society. That doesn't even make sense. So like when they made choices to like take these educational programs out of prisons, like you said, it makes more sense to try to improve someone. Obviously, they had an issue. They were lacking a skill to function in society like the rest of us. So shouldn't you try to then teach them that skill, bring them up to where we are, rather than give them more obstacles to jump through? So now you come out of prison, you're a felon, and we know when on interviews they ask you whether you have a felony.
That's right.
And they're less likely to hire you. So you were already at a deficit before. Now you can't get hired, but mind you, you have to pay when you're on probation. When you come out of prison, you're on probation. You have to pay for your probation officer. I don't know if people know that. You pay your probation officer. You pay for your drug testing. You pay your court fees, and you have to have a job. But you can't get a job. And so what people end up doing is saying, well, I got to make this money because I'm not going back. So what do? You turn to the only way you know how to make money, which typically is criminal activity, which then takes you where? Back to incarceration. That's why the recidivism rate is something like 70%.
In America?
Yeah.
Recidivism, wow.
It's currently Oklahoma. It was Louisiana last year.
And
Georgia's up there.
That's percentage-wise or that number?
Per percentage-wise, yeah.
Okay.
And it's crazy. We can maybe put some of these on our Instagram accounts, these graphs I'm looking at. When you compare like a state like Georgia, Oklahoma, Louisiana to the rest of the world, the United States is number one. But Georgia's incarceration rate, it's off the chart. Then the United States is off the chart. And then it falls so far back. I mean, it's crazy. United Kingdom is third. But if you take all the states, they killed all the other countries. I mean, America, it's out of control.
It's out of control.
Because it's a business, would you say?
Well, I'd say twofold.
No, I would say I'm probably a little bit prone to what Tim's saying. If you look at our population in prison, it's all black. So if I look and say if I look at these countries and say, who do I think's more racist in the world? Portugal or the United States? Canada or the United States? France or the United States?
And I would also argue
it's been that way since.
It's been that way for a while.
I mean, it's not like recently our incarceration rates of blacks has gone up. I mean, it's so disproportionate. You can't not apply it to race. Yeah. And I mean, you can say obviously social economics, I would say, plays a part in crime and things like that. But again, why is it only here that one race is so socioeconomically behind? Therefore, again, maybe has all these other problems. It can't not be on purpose.
And that's what I always say. When it's hard because typically we look at things issue by issue. So we look at incarceration rates, and we say, oh, we study that one issue, but they're all intertwined. So like you say, the income or what did you say? The socioeconomic. So you say, well, why is it that these certain communities are struggling in this way? And it's like, well, it's linked to, it goes through all different reasons: housing, bank loans, education. And so when you look at each one of those things, they're given roadblocks. So by the time you come to incarceration, it's like,
And here's the thing, like you were talking a minute ago, should felons have a right to vote? Or we'll even go to like just incarceration in general. Like, should people be in jail for these smaller offenses? Should they be in jail as long as they are for maybe a little bit more, serious offense? Here's what I like to say. It's usually about who you know. So, Jared, how many people do you know currently in jail?
More than I used to. Some good friends in jail right now.
There you go. It probably changed your opinion a little bit, right?
Yeah, I did.
And I just say right now, if people are listening, if they ask themselves, what's my opinion of jail? If we've been, clearly most of us seem like we're on the same page, but if people have been listening and like, these guys, boy, they're pretty soft. I don't agree. We need to lock them up. And I would just ask yourself, if you're of that opinion, how many people do you know that have been in jail, are currently in jail, or that you expect to be in jail in the future? Because if you say, I know a lot of people that have been in jail or going to be in jail or currently in jail, and I want it to be hard, and then I'll listen to you. But if you can't tell me you have had a close family member, a good friend be put in jail, even rightly so, I'm not saying unjustly so. If you tell me I don't have anybody like that, but I want to be hard on them, I'd say we probably should go talk to some people that have a family member who made a mistake or we won't even call it a mistake, committed a bad crime, but is sorry about it. I mean, everybody goes through things like that, but if you don't know people that have been through that, typically you're not as understanding. So when it goes to like the right of a person to vote in prison, I'm sure I do somewhere, but right now I can't think of anybody offhand that I know personally that's in prison. So when I first hear this, it's a little shocking to give a felon a right to vote. I mean, my whole life that's been a thing that, I knew, like, man, you commit a felony, that's it. You can't own a gun. If you're in jail, you can't vote. So it's a little shock to the system. But the more I thought about it, it's like, well, why would they lose that right? Because they, again, at 18, jacked a car. Not to mention, which I love, this is what I love about the future, and Tim's right, I am optimistic. Not to mention that because we invented DNA testing, it's like every month I see this guy get out of jail. He's been there 40 years. He wasn't supposed to be there. And, we give him $15,000 to get back on his feet. And let's make it clear, we took away his right to vote.
That's right.
So I just say a lot of times, like, it changed my view on capital punishment. I used to be like, well, hey, you kill 18 people or, rape a woman and kill her, man, you got to get killed. But then I started to hear about guys that got off that they proved didn't rape somebody who was scheduled to be killed. It's like, well, even if one person, if one time, which is preposterous because there's many now, if one person you showed me that we had convicted on death row and we learned beyond a shadow of a doubt he didn't do it, that would be the end of death penalty to me. You can't do it. You can't risk killing somebody. It costs more money. It takes way more years. And we kill a human being who might not supposed to have been killed. Then you have to stop.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about do you know someone? And I would say before I think I've had 4 friends in jail or prison or federal penitentiary in the last 5 years. And it's interesting the reasons they've gone to jail, right? So one of them in India, because I've been there a couple times and done the similar thing, you're distributing medicine in a village and you're distributing some things for people in dire pain. In this country, my friend is in jail for 14 years for doing that, selling pain meds, right? Over in India, I was a missionary, right? So I'd be very curious, how many hardened criminals do we have in our system here versus people practicing medicine without a license, or now that marijuana is being legalized in lots of places, they were making a little business on their own, where in another country, they'd be known as the little entrepreneur, witch doctor, voodoo, or local doctor, whatever it may be. So I think that we need to be careful on thinking that we got it all figured out.
And you guys bring up 2 very important points, like you said, like the story about Meek Mills, who he was talking in a room to, I think it was it Kraft, but he was talking to these.
They were getting a massage.
Exactly. They were in orchids, getting a nice rub down. No, but he was talking
On
to,
camera.
Thanks to the federal government.
But he was talking to a room primarily full of wealthy, well-to-do white men, and he was telling his story, and they were kind of shocked by it, like because now they know him. They're like, "Wow, that's crazy! How that happened to you?" And he's like, "Yeah, to you it sounds so far-fetched." He's like, "That's an everyday occurrence. I know 10 people, my close friends, who that happened to." And he's like, "How many of you know somebody who has either been shot or?" And they're like, "No, I don't know anybody."
Oh, wow.
You know, but he said when it's your experience, when you know people, you view it very differently.
Yeah, I have another friend I talked to recently. He works as a guard at a prison. And he was actually considering becoming a Christian, like being baptized. Like, I want to be a Christian. Wife's a Christian. And he basically said, I can't. I was like, why is that? He said, man, in there, it is so hard, meaning you have to put on this just front. And I compare that to, I'm bringing all these stories out, like, no, all my friends are hardened criminals. No. But
I was going to say, it's not me. I've never been to jail.
Yeah. But no, another guy said, it's just so much darker than what we think. It's not just you go, you sit in your cell, you eat food. He said, it is a bad place. And the guards do not help the situation. He talked about how it was just corrupt. I'm like, man, if it's corrupt on the outside that got you in there and it's corrupt on the inside, like, it's hard to wonder you don't give up on society. And what's the statement? If you have nothing left to lose, you lose it. We shouldn't be so surprised with guys getting back into something that we didn't help them.
Well, and like, I mean, I think, the reaction, the people can have is like, yeah, that's why they're like animals. They need to be locked up. But it's like, but that's all the more reason why we need to try to do a good job. I mean, they didn't just wake up psychopaths. They weren't born that way. There's some systems in place that allowed them to continue to kind of feed that side of their life. And my point with that is, of course it's hard. These are a lot of them are bad people. They're not in prison because they went through a stop sign.
Yeah.
I mean, some probably
Some
are because they
are.
screwed them. But I'm saying, but there are some bad dudes in there. But my point is, I like Tim's analogy of like the animal. And if you locked it up, it's like all the more reason why we have to go above and beyond, because we're not trying to, in a lot of cases, rehabilitate a guy like me or you or one of our that just made a mistake and the system did wrong. That's not the guy we're trying to rehabilitate. Unfortunately, that guy, when he goes into prison, turns pretty quickly into the other guy because it is such a bad place. That's why it's more important that we really study, really look at history, really get experts involved to say like, oh, what does it actually take to help these people rehabilitate? And I go back, I was going to ask you earlier, like, work is such a good thing. Mm-hmm. Anybody who enjoys what they do or has put in a hard day's work and had a satisfaction feeling at the end of it knows the value of work. And unfortunately, because the work programs used to be so abused in the South, they did away with them. But that was a bad choice.
Yeah, you're right.
Today we can't get them back because we're competing with private industry and it's hard to compete and all these things. But work
Wait, whoa. We can't get them back. Oh, you're not aware. They work in prison a lot of times.
Well, yes, I know.
For pennies.
Yeah, for nothing. But that's what I'm saying is I just go back and say, especially, getting people outside. These are things, we know. You put somebody in a dark room all day. It's like, it's not a good thing. You have to. So
what do you think was going to happen?
Yeah, so going back, like you said, responsibly figuring out how to get work programs and things like that could go a long way. But that, again, you'd have to have that be your desire.
What do you think happened? Because we got rid of asylums in this country decades ago.
Oh, don't get me started on that.
So did that contribute to this issue?
Don't get me started on that because I would say, yeah, that's why we have mass shootings.
Absolutely.
Because we used to put them in an
We used to have
asylum.
mental asylums, and basically a documentary came out in the 60s because they were such horrible places and we were mistreating them so badly, and we were. It was horrible and sad, but that basically ended mental asylums. The solution wasn't let's fix the system for a thing that we need. The solution was, then let's get rid of them, and because they were lobbied, I'm sure, by prescription drug companies, let's just let them out, medicate them, and see what happens. And I would say about every few months, we get to see what happens.
Yeah, and like kind of saying about the guards, like most people don't realize how rough prisons actually are. So I remember I visited a prison one time for a sociology class I was in, and we got one of the guards was giving us a little preview before we actually went in, and he said something to the effect of 85% of individuals participate in homosexual activity while in prison, willingly or unwillingly. 85%?
Wow.
That's a high number. Or you saw the incident where the couple inmates were handcuffed together. A guard was standing there watching while another inmate was stabbing them. And they were like trying to like run around. And it's on video camera. How many people have heard of that? Not very many. Most people would be like, what, that happens? Yes, that happens. You know, it's such a corrupt system. Like you said, so when you get in there, you're not being rehabilitated, you're becoming worse. Or the fact that, you know, I think it's something like 70% of deaths in prison take place within the first, is it 3 weeks or 3 months? I think it's 3 weeks.
Really?
70% in the first 3 weeks. Now, mind you, I mean, that's jails or prisons, right? And now also remember the fact that you go to jail if you can't pay your bail. So make those two things make sense. You're fighting an uphill battle. But the reality is, at the end of the day, America has turned into a police state, and people haven't acknowledged that. That's why so many people are engulfed by the criminal justice system, but because large swaths of America, like as you said, aren't touched by it themselves, they don't know somebody in it. They think, no, the system's working. It's effective. And I'll say, even if you don't care about people, even if you don't care about rehabilitation, even if you don't care about justice, you should care about fiscal responsibility as a country. So it is fiscally irresponsible for us to continue to do what we're doing. As numbers you said, when we jail somebody, they are producing nothing. But it costs us immensely. You know, it costs more to jail someone for a year than to send them to college or university.
I didn't know that.
I did know that.
So you know, so it's like, make that make sense to me that we're gonna lock you away, and it costs us immensely, as opposed to saying, how can we help you become better? So even if you don't care about people, care about your tax dollars. Care about Social Security, because if we spend all this money on incarceration, how are we going to pay Social Security, which in 10 years is going to be insolvent?
And that's another episode. That's a good place to end. Any last words?
I'd like to revisit on a kind of more broad topic. Just in general, there's a topic there: punishment versus rehabilitation. It's basically what we're talking about. You know, the one camp wants to punish, one camp, maybe we're all in, want to rehabilitate. And I think there's a broader discussion there. What do you do with your children? You know, is it punishment? Do you think that works, or is it or is it teach them the lesson so that it doesn't happen again? And I just think we could revisit just on a real broad topic.
You've been listening to Rhodium Radio. As you can see, we're having a good time, and we hope you are too. For more episodes like this, go to rhodiumradio.com. We'll see you next time.